Let me check the recording. Outstanding. All right. Welcome, everyone, to the OpenWallet Foundation workshop, Technical Standards Underpinning ARF, Part 1, OpenID4VP. And we would really like to thank the incredible team of Oliver and Kristina for offering to present this workshop. We cannot thank them enough. And I'm going to keep this super short and just go through two real quick slides. Number one, as with all Linux Foundation meetings, this is held under the Linux Foundation Antitrust Policy and Competition Policy Notice. Examples of actions that are prohibited at Linux Foundation Europe meetings and in connection with the Linux Foundation activities are described in the Linux Foundation Antitrust Policy. I'll put this link into the chat later. If you have any questions about these matters, please contact your company counsel, or if you're a member of the Linux Foundation, feel free to contact Andrew Updegrove of the firm Gesmer Updegrove LLP, which provides legal counsel to the Linux Foundation. Secondly, this is held under the Linux Foundation Code of Conduct, which can best be summed up as be excellent to each other, be kind to each other, be respectful to each other. We are incredibly lucky and fortunate to have such great contributors and presenters like Kristina and Oliver, and we can't thank them enough, and we hope you appreciate the amount of work that they put into this presentation. And lastly, get involved. Open source works with you. It needs you. We need people using this software. We need folks talking about this software. We need folks contributing to this software. And we cannot thank enough the individuals who've registered and joined this workshop. Two or three little bits of housekeeping. Number one, this is being recorded. It will be posted to the OpenWallet Foundation YouTube channel. It will be posted to the OpenWallet Foundation blog. And we're going to send out a thank you note to everyone who registered for this workshop. You can share those, and you can share that with anybody you'd like. We'd be happy to have them shared far and wide. Secondly, we do have a Discord, and I'll be sharing a number of links in the chat, probably once or twice an hour throughout the course of the workshop. And lastly, and I mentioned this before for some of the folks who got here early, it's really hard to run a workshop like this and do verbal questions. It's next to impossible, even with raising hands, with this many people. And also we want to, wherever possible, find ways to capture the questions and not have someone have to transcribe them. So if you have a question for our presenters, please put it into chat. I think as Kristina just mentioned, we're going to go through some slides and go through a demo, and then we'll be able to take questions towards the end. And lastly, we have a Discord at OpenWallet Foundation. It is where most of our in-the-moment chats happen and discussions happen. And so feel free to check that out. The link will be in the chat shortly. And now I turn it over to Kristina and Oliver, and thank them once again for putting on this great presentation. Oliver, you should have... somebody's switching language. Oliver, you should have the ability to share your screen whenever you'd like. There you go.
Yeah, thank you.
You got it.
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm Oliver, and I'm one of the OpenID4VP editors. I'm going to present today only a short update on OpenID4VP. We'll have another session on OpenID4VCI, which is about credential issuance, I believe, this week. Just a very brief overview of what are the highlights of OpenID4VP. Verify our presentations. The current status is that we have the second implementers draft, which was published in May 2023. It was designed for highest degree of privacy. So a wallet doesn't necessarily have to have a backend to store and transmit the credentials. Various different security levels can be supported, which is especially useful or important in the context of EUDIW and ARF. It's an easy of use for developers because it uses very familiar standards underneath, such as OAuth. So there are a lot of developers that have experience with that. It uses JSON-based requests and responses and very familiar other signed request objects like JWTs, for example. It's also possible to present multiple credentials in one response. Also specifically useful in the context of AIF, because you can use this to present a PID and qualified electronic attribute attestations, various different deployment models are supported. So you can have a fully native wallet, or you can have a cloud wallet, and technically also like a hybrid approach is possible, where you would have a secure key storage, such as the cloud HSM in the backend that signs over the response. Really depends on what deployment option you would like to choose. It also supports various trust frameworks and credential formats. So for example, it's possible to support X509 certificates, but also trust models that are rooted in OpenID4 Federation and others potentially. Credential formats, again, so OpenID4VP supports a variety of those. You can also mix credential formats in responses in case you have a MDoc PID and an SD short VC credential at the same time. You can combine those in the response as well. Just very brief overview how this works. So this is a same device presentation flow. So where you have a mobile device, the user uses a mobile browser to go to a relying party. The relying party then basically invokes the wallet. The wallet gets unlocked, and the user typically agrees to give consent to share the data. So normally the wallets, they would, like present an overview of what's requested, who is the requester, and then the user can choose to present the data. Yeah. The other option is also supports cross-device presentation flows, where the user starts with a desktop browser, then the relying party typically renders a QR code that contains the request. After scanning the QR code, the wallet gets invoked, and the presentation is generated on the device of the user and sent by the device to an endpoint of the server of the relying party, and then the flow concludes. This is a very simplified version of the flow. A couple of security measures on top of that this doesn't really show yet. I think most important part is, since probably most people on this call are familiar with with OpenID4VP, this is an overview of the most recent updates. I think the most important one, that's maybe with the simpler one. So we added the ability for the wallet to negotiate the capabilities with a verifier. So it's possible that the verifier then includes their verifier metadata in the request, and the wallet then sends the request. When the wallet fetches the request object from the verifier, the wallet is also able to include the wallet nonce, which then gets signed by the verifier, so that the wallet then would receive a request that is signed and signs over a wallet provided nonce, which is a more nice change response protocol, so to say. The other really important update is OpenID4VP over Digital Credentials API. As some of you might know, there are some things that can be improved, especially with custom UI schemes. And so this really solves that issue, and a lot of other things get improved. So it has it's basically a very flexible and privacy-preserving way to solve the wallet selection problem. So the idea is that the browser provides an API and browser API, which then the relying party can use to provide a OpenID4VP request. And then the browser interacts with the platform API, and so mobile platform in that case, for example, Android or iOS, but other platforms are also possible. And the platform then makes sure to call the intended wallet and provide the OpenID4VP request. So it's in that case, the user typically can decide what credential to select to answer the request, and then the platform invokes the wallet. And so this approach, again, gets rid of the custom UI schemes, which had some downsides. And you can also deploy this then in a cross-device flow, which greatly improves security. So for example, we saw demos using the digital credentials API in cross-device scenarios. It's basically using, the current idea is using FIDO and the C-type hybrid protocol in those cases. So you would get the same security guarantees that you would get in cross-device FIDO flows, passkeys, for example, which is great. Because it enables also a lot of new use cases. Yeah, so again, the UX is definitely greatly improved because you know, so the demos or the implementations that we have seen so far is that so when the relying party calls the browser API, it's just a JavaScript call typically. Then what then happens is that on the mobile platform would then render a native view, which allows the user to select the credential to be shared, to the credentials. And so you don't have to necessarily, it's basically just a more native experience now, or it will be. Because it's still, the browser API is still in development in W3C, but we are working in OpenID Foundation to define how the browser API can be used with OpenID4VP. So I think this is basically the two major updates. I'm also asking Kristina, do you have anything to add on to this slide, or fine?
Oh, good.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think it's fine. I think did you cover request URI method post as well? Did I miss it?
Yeah, that was the first thing I mentioned, because I think
okay,
that's
okay, good. Okay. You went
also
right to left. Okay.
yeah, so there was a smaller update, but also an important update. But I think the biggest update is probably the digital credentials API in W3C, previously YCG. I think it's already in the FedCM working group, is it?
Not, yeah, but don't quote me. Not sure.
Okay. The topics that are currently under discussion in OpenID4VP are a way to simplify the current query language. So at the moment, we are using OpenID4VP uses div presentation exchange. The idea is to simplify this. So we have an active conversation and already a proposal in the OpenID Foundation. The other big topic that we have is which enables a couple of more use cases, is to include transaction data in the request. The relying party would include a new parameter, I believe, to be decided. We have to spec that out, which is transaction data. And then the wallet would receive the transaction data along with the request. And the wallet would then be able to sign over the transaction data bound to a specific or particular credentials, like a PID, for example. And use cases that people have in mind with this is payment confirmation and qualified electronic signature authorization. So these are the major updates. And it was a very short presentation, because the idea was that we would have an AMA. So we are happy to go into detail if people have a specific question. Yeah, so
the point of updates were, while we were working on the transaction data, for example, based on the large scale pilots feedback on potentials, qualified electronic signature use case, and EWC's payment use case. For query language, yeah, so I see the question in chat from Nicholas. We don't have clarity on how the transition would look like. Either we'll have a draft where both presentation exchange and this new query language will coexist, or not. But like that's definitely like what we want to be careful with. So if you have input regarding how the transition should look like feel free to speak up. But yeah, so the point was, yeah, not to scare with all the changes coming, but more on, yeah, the things we're working on and the years are still there. We're open for input. But yeah. Okay, so do you want to go question by question, Oliver? I think the first question is it possible to use PPS plus signature and include the new EUDIW ARF instead of his DJOT? And Christian is answering. So we can't comment on ARF compliance, but from OpenID4VP perspective, yeah, you can definitely do PPS plus with whatever credential format you're using.
Can you explain
People
the
speak up, or they have to request unmute? Does
this answer your
people,
question, Rico?
yeah. Can people react like with thumbs up or something? Or is that not enabled as well? We see thumbs up. Okay, good.
Okay, so next question
So-
is explain the attestation part in detail. I guess that refers to the wallet attestation.
I think so. That's
OpenID4VP, right? More like.
well, so regulation does require attestation during presentation too, right? Like we would not encourage verifiers to request it every single time. But from a technical specification perspective, like we do need to enable it. There is an issue open. I'll try dig out the number later, but I think there's 3 approaches we've discussed. The first, I think there are mainly 2 being discussed. So one is sending sorry, hang on. So yeah, sending wallet attestation to the verifier as a separate credential. So if let's say verifier is requesting MDL, to include MDL and the wallet attestation as a credential alongside. Second approach was the wallet attestation is returned not as a separate credential, but kind of as a key to sign the whole request. So if folks are familiar with JARM, something like that, where assuming, for example, verifier requested MDL and a PID, response VP token contains MDL and a PID, the whole thing is signed using wallet attestation in the header. So those are 2 approaches being discussed, and we don't have a conclusion just yet. But if you're talking, yeah, if you're talking about attestation during issuance, yeah, we'll cover it on Wednesday.
Right.
Sorry, Oliver, you were saying something.
Next question is this available in Bifold Wallet? So I'm not familiar with that. Kristina, can you speak to that?
What's Bifold Wallet?
Bifold is it's formerly Aries Bifold out of the Hyperledger team. They have recently, in the last few months, joined the OpenWallet Foundation. It is the wallet that's in use, I believe, for bc.gov's org book, and there are a number of other folks using it.
I am not an expert on that. Is there anyone who's familiar with Bifold Wallet?
I mean, I was previously very familiar with Aries wallets. So in general, there's no reason to not be able to implement it, but I also cannot comment on whether or not it's supported yet.
Tim, yeah. Oh, wrong. Oh.
Oh, thanks. There we go. Yeah, so by phone wallet, we'll be adding OpenID for in the near future, but it's not there right now.
Okay, great. Thank you,
It's
Tim.
enabled in Credo, so which is the core libraries that bifold uses.
Right.
So yeah,
Thank you.
we figured out speaking. So if you'd like to speak, just raise a hand and we can unmute you pretty smoothly, I guess.
We have a couple of more questions in the chat. Next one is it possible for a relying party to pay for the costs of issuing a credential to a holder wallet? So I think that's actually out of scope of the OpenID4VP and credential issuance spec. So I think it should be possible to do something like that, but it's definitely not defined by any of those specifications. And we are not planning to add this to the specification. Next question is, in the case of multiple wallets on a device, would the query language allow us to select the right wallet and have a response with end-to-end encryption? And I think we already have an answer provided by Christian. So it's so it should be possible. But I think so Kristina, please correct me if I'm wrong. So since sorry, I was actually thinking that refers to the browser API. So so if the question refers to the current specification,
Hang on. So even the browser API does not allow well, no, I'm wrong. So I guess this question is twofold. For the multiple wallets on the same device, without the browser API, that's only custom URL schemes, which is not a good user experience, as we all probably know. So with the browser API, that part addresses the selection of multiple wallets. Is that what you're about to say, Oliver?
Yeah. That's what I was saying actually. You could technically use deep links with so HTTPS claimed deep links, so where the mobile platform actually makes sure that the right wallet gets invoked. It's also possible, but then you don't really have a wallet selection. With the browser API, you will have that, obviously.
And yeah, for the end-to-end encryption, that would be JARM. I'll find the relevant section and specification, but I think Fabrice, partially for the 2.0-4 use cases, for the MDL use cases, that is enabled. It's orthogonal to wallet selection or query language. So one extension we did is original JARM ITF RFC. This only allows encryption with signing. What we did is we allowed encryption only because each credential is already individually signed. That is documented on OpenID4VP spec. And again, the third part of your question, Fabrice, the query language. So query language is more about selecting the right credential. Query language part is not about wallet selection. Query language is just it's literally a different. It should be separated, right? So using query language, the verifier expresses what credentials the verifier wants from the wallet and what restriction it wants to apply, like type, format, what issuer, what claims have to be present, what attributes have to be present, whatnot, and how that whole reclass, including the query language, gets to the wallet. That part is custom schemes or browser API, right? And after wallet processes that, when it sends a response, whether it's end-to-end encrypted, that's JARM. I hope that answers question, Fabrice. And I think Christian also wrote it down.
Okay. Next question is there an estimate for when query language is decided and what could it be? Sorry if I missed it. That's definitely one of the next things that we're focusing on. So in fact, we already have a proposal on the table. But Kristina, do you have any estimations? I don't want to do an estimation on the query language, but I think we are getting there soon.
Yeah, so the current status is, so we took this query language process very, very carefully. So meaning, just to explain the backstory, so we first in the working group, the feedback, has been coming in about query language, and we as a working group agreed on a process. I think it's documented somewhere in the issue, that we'll gather requirements first, agree on the requirements, what we need to enable using query language, and then so that has been agreed. I will share an issue in the chat later. Based on that, throughout there were multiple drafts, multiple proposals. Then at the Internet Daily workshop, we sat down in person, and based on that, there were a few other discussions after that, and we have a proposal on the table right now. I'll put issue to that too in the chat, and we're kind of in the process of gathering feedback on that. So once we feel confident that there's rough consensus on the proposal on the table, and we can make modifications, obviously based on the feedback coming in. I think majority of feedback coming in is around alternative claims. So requesting like, hey, I want you to give claim age over 18, but if that claim is not available, I'm okay with you giving me the birth date claim, for example. That, and also the logic around if verifier is saying, hi, can you please give me one out of these 3 credentials? For example, can you give me either French, Italian, or German PID, like whatever user has, for example, right? So how to express that, I think, is the biggest point of discussion. The rest seems to be more or less settled. And once we agree, we'll do a PR, and once it gets merged, it's officially in the spec. So yeah, it's probably 1 to 2 months minimum, optimistically, right, Oliver?
Yeah.
Optimistically.
So the next question is it possible to think about near future of CKP verification processes? So this is a question. Essentially, this is out of scope of OpenID4VP verifier representation, but the way people approach this so far is it's OpenID4VP because it's credential format agnostic. It's possible that you would also you can also use OpenID4VP with credential presentations that support CKPs like CK-SNUGs. But OpenID4VP is not defining any credential formats, nor does it define proof types. So this is something that is out of scope. And for example, we have already W3C, verifiable credential data model, data integrity, for example. That's not defined by OpenID4VP. We have IETF, SD-short verifiable credentials, which is defined by the OAuth working group. It's also not defined by OpenID4VP directly. And you, of course, also have ISO 18013 Part 5, or like more general, let's say MDocs, so ISO MDocs, which are also not defined by OpenID4VP, but it's defined by an ISO standard. So if somebody defines a credential format based on CK-SNUGs, yes, it's possible to support that using OpenID4VP. Next question is maybe a terminology thing. Can you please elaborate on the bound to a transaction-specific data? So I think the idea is that the request would have some transaction data, for example, the hash of a document, and then the verifiable representation that is generated by the mobile device, which can be linked to a PID or other credentials, would then sign over the provided transaction data. I think that's meant by this binding. Kristina, do you have anything? Do you agree with that? Essentially.
Yeah, I think that's right. So basically the use cases, if you're familiar with strong customer authentication requirements in Europe, for example, so two use cases we're mainly looking on, Oliver already covered, so I'm just repeating at this point, but qualified electronic signature, where data to be signed is passed in the request, and in the response, that data to be signed is bound to the digital credential used to identify the user. So there's this one-to-one binding, and in this case, transaction-specific data would refer to data to be signed with payments. In the request, you would put, merchant, amount, IBAN, whatnot. That would be, again, included in the key binding jot, for example, if it's TJOT. So there's this one-to-one mapping between, transaction-specific payment data and the credential that we use to identify the user. So that's, yeah. Let me see if I can.
Yeah,
Does that make sense, Nikos?
Perhaps you can find the link to the Google document.
Yeah, I'll do it.
Because there's a Google document, basically a design document that describes the requirements and explains this binding, and based on two use cases, I believe. So I think Kristina will share that in a minute. So the next question is, am I right to assume that the query language will be similar to the diff presentation exchange? So I think, so first of all, we still have an active discussion in the OpenID Foundation in the DCP working group. So, to be decided, but I think the current proposal is to use presentation to reuse the top level objects. But it will definitely not use, the current proposal, current direction is actually to not use JSON path or JSON pointers. So it will be a much simpler representation. And I think we also have a PR in the OpenID4VP repository. So if Kristina, if you can also find a link to that PR, then I think Michael, you will be able to find the current proposal. Which
or
again,
query language. What do you want me to find?
Yeah.
Okay.
But again,
Gotcha.
so this is an ongoing discussion. The current idea is to use at least the top level objects, but I think the current idea is not to use JSON path or JSON pointer, because that was one thing that a lot of people were complaining about. All right. So I think Fabrice, can you comment if you still have the question on? He was saying that
I want to hear Fabrice's voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So
speaking.
Yeah, basically, I'm looking at the link you shared. So it's actually on the different options for the query. So it's actually interesting. I'm not sure if that covers which issuer. I need to look at the rules to understand better, but at least there are plenty of use cases. So it sounds very interesting.
If we have time, Oliver, might be worth explaining for a language proposal here too, actually. Like once we finish going through the
Right, but I would not go into too much detail.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. Okay. Let's go down the questions first.
I think that question probably came up. So I think some people had the question if it's possible to basically request a credential based on the issuer value. I think, is this included in the current proposal? I think it is.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Let me see if we have an example. Maybe we don't.
There's another question on the payments and transaction data topic. There's a question if it will be possible to authorize the transaction and also attest things like I'm over 21. So the verifier can use the same presentation request for both concerns. So in my opinion, yes. So I think the current direction is it should be possible, or it is possible, because you are essentially signing, because you can combine transaction data with a presentation definition object, which defines the query for credentials, whereas the transaction data is the data to be signed, or a link to the data to be signed. But this is the data to be signed is basically, so the idea is that the transaction data is just a it's just an opaque string. At least that's the proposal. And then specific domains, specific use cases or verticals that can define what actually goes into the transaction data. One is QES, the other one might be payment confirmation. And yeah, so that's basically possible to use in parallel to presentation definition. So it should be possible. Yeah, I think we already covered
So put it otherwise. I'm over 21 is part of the credential you're requesting, and payments transaction data is like a separate mechanism you're adding on top, right? So
sorry if I didn't.
Sorry, go ahead, Oliver.
Yeah. I think we already covered the terminology question, right?
I think the next one is, will there be a provision for credentials type vocabulary, like German's PID, to be used by the query language?
So this, so in my opinion, that's an ecosystem question. So I think it's
Yeah.
an AI question. So I think my personal opinion is there will be, but I can't really speak to what goes into AIF. But I believe there will be like a common scheme for PIDs, and yeah.
Yeah, I think we need clearly defined schemas. I think rulebooks and ARF try to do it for PID and MDL, but we need that for many other types of credentials. And yeah, the big question is where they should be. I don't know, hopefully in ARF, rulebooks. I think SDJOT VC has a resolvable VCT type proposal. Did you want to speak to that, Oliver?
Sorry, I was focusing on the next question. Could you repeat that?
Oh, sorry. So
Yeah,
the SD, yeah. Do you want to cover that?
No, go ahead, please.
I mean, Oliver's the editor, but SDJOT VC, I think there's a draft. I think it's partially merged, partially still in discussion, where the type value in the SDJOT VC is resolvable. And it leads to, I see Nico's just asking metadata in the chat, and that kind of leads to the schema definition. So it could be and the benefit of making it resolvable, obtainable from the credential itself is it could be used equally by the issuer, issuer would know, by the wallet after wallet receives the credential when the wallet needs to display the credential in the wallet, or by the verifier after verifier receives it and needs to validate data values, whatnot. I think that's one proposal. Yeah, so right now, yes, we have it mainly in issuer metadata, but the feedback has been coming in. It might be useful to make it obtainable, resolvable from the credential type itself. Or alternative is obviously like having a registry or something where you can discover all those schemas, types in the same place.
Yes, exactly. So sorry, I was not getting the question.
No,
but
it's fine, it's fine.
You're totally right what you just said. So the idea is with SD charts, SD chart we see is you have the VCT claim and the different options how you would go from the VCT value to the VCT type metadata. And one of the type metadata parameters is the JSON schema of the type. And how you go from type VCT value to type metadata is the different options. Like Kristina said, there's the option to have a central registry or like a decentralized registries. You can have each domain, like education domain or like the finance domain, they can each have their own registries. But it would still be possible based on the VCT type value to identify where to go to get the actually type metadata that contains the JSON schema. And one option is to resolve the type metadata based on an HTTPS URL, which where you just append the well-known URL. I hope that answers the question. But I think that personally believe that that ecosystems specifically, the AIF should probably cover the PID schema definition, but that's just my personal opinion. And then specific domains can define their own, or issuer can define their own by making them dynamically discoverable using the well-known approach I just mentioned. So next question is, in absence of wallet attestation, how implementers plan to protect the presentation endpoint from arbitrary hits from the internet?
Oh, even with the wallet attestation, you're not actually protecting, right?
So is this referring to the response UI endpoint? So where you would send the presentation response? I guess that's the question.
Would you like to speak up and elaborate? You're in a place where you can speak.
Yeah, to the response URI.
Right. Yeah, so I think there are multiple different options. So that's basically you would have the same options that are being used by any internet applications today or cloud applications today. And one of them is like WARF or rate limiting and so on. So you can actually protect endpoints quite well these days. And yeah, so I think there's, if the question was more like if there are like additional measures that the OpenID4VP protocol defines. So I think at the moment there is not. Wallet attestation will be one of them if relying parties then decide to use the wallet attestation to protect that endpoint. But there is, with many other web applications today, there are ways how to protect endpoints from DDoS and so on.
Yeah, so I think to follow up on Oliver's that it clearly has to be differentiated, protecting the endpoint from arbitrary hits, which is what Oliver just described. The wallet attestation wouldn't help you with that, right? If I'm DDoSing you, I can generate, millions of fake wallet attestations and just, keep hitting your endpoint. And like having or not wallet attestation doesn't really help with that, right? Wallet attestation is more about, I think Michael's asking a follow-up question. It's more about, who am I talking to? So Oliver, if I can just quickly cover the next one. So Michael's saying, yes, the wallet attestation should be ephemeral to prevent it to be a super cookie that verifier can use to track the wallet instances around. And the way we're interpreting regulation, and Paolo from European Commission has been commenting on the issue himself in the 141, the requirement seems to be the user can ask the wallet instance to be revoked. So the main goal here is to make sure that the wallet instance is not revoked, is my understanding. So it's not the key attestation. So WSCD part should happen during issuance. So here it's more about the wallet instance itself. Does that make sense? I don't know if you can speak. Maybe not.
Mike said in the chat, yeah, it makes sense, but that's not Javier.
Okay. Cool.
So did you cover now both questions that Michael had?
I think so.
We ran out of questions.
Yeah, there's following up. He's saying, and why the specification states the wallet should not return an OS authorization code, access token, or access token type in a successful response to the grant request. So that's because it's not an authorization code flow, and it's not an implicit flow. When supplied as a response type parameter, explanation request. So we should improve this definition of there is an issue Daniel Feld has been arguing forever. We need to improve definition of like VP token as an artifact versus response type VP token. Like this is a section which defines response type VP token explicitly. And the purpose here is to say that response type VP token only requires to return VP token. So if verifier is sending response type VP token and it's receiving authorization code, access token, or access token type, it should be an error.
Yeah, right.
Unless you're combining it with authorization code flow, in which case you're probably not doing HTTPS post. If you can do authorization code flow, you probably have a wallet provider server, the backend, the wallet backend, where you're sending your access token directly. So the way OpenID4VP is written is it's not restricting you for the grant type you're using, right? So when it says response in section 6, it can be a token endpoint in case where you have wallet server, wallet backend that is sending you the credential directly. So wallet backend to verifier backend, but the specification is more optimized to in a deployment model where wallet is managing credentials locally, not on the server. So it's the wallet instance who is sending those credentials to the verifier backend. So we're not limiting the wallet deployment models, but at the same time, it is true that the way it's designed or written right now probably, optimizes for credentials not being sent through the wallet backend. So that's separate from using wallet backend to manage the keys, right? Like, because, using Cloud HSM is one, actually storing credentials with PII on a server is somewhat different. Yeah, but recently we have received feedback from implementers who want to use wallet server to communicate to the verifier. So that's a topic being investigated, but it's just what I think some of the editors heard directly from the implementers. They haven't discussed it in the working group yet.
Yeah. I remember now that we had this discussion a while back in the working group to make that section clearer. I also had the same question.
No, on my to-do list, literally that update VP token section has been forever. So yeah.
We'll put it on my to-do list.
Yeah, great. Now it's on few people's to-do list.
Then next question is, once things like the new query language are included on the spec or in the spec, are there any plans to create a profile focused on interop or expand the hype? So I think the idea, I think, is, or my hope is that the new query language, and it's not only my hope, it also looks like it will be like a much simpler approach. So you probably don't need to have an explicit interop profile because the query language can be fully implemented. You don't need to profile it, but so I think the idea is then also that things like hype would refer to that, to the new query language. So I would be supportive of like to have basically point to the newer, simpler query language in more recent versions of the profile of profiles.
So there is an issue open to potentially define mandatory to implement features in a new query language. So I think, Michael, I'm sorry if I'm misinterpreting, but I think what you might be saying, or at least what we've heard, is with PE, like you never know what features that both verifier and the wallet supports. We actually do have mandatory to implement draft for PE, but for this new query language, we do have an issue open where there is a suggestion on the table to define mandatory to implement features, which is honestly looking like pretty much majority of the features. So when verifier is talking to the wallet, they both have high degree of certainty that both support the same feature set without any profile. But obviously there will be, optional things for, like, for example, and I'm sorry if it's a bit too complex, but there's this functionality that Daniel has been proposing where you can specify as a verifier, like, wallet, I trust you to calculate age over 12 is true based on the value you have stored in the wallet, right? So verifier is communicating, hey, this, I want you to calculate it and just return me the value. For things like that, I think they will be optional. But for those things, profiles might have to say we support it, but it's probably a big improvement that at least there will be a clearly defined mandatory to implement feature set, hopefully, is direction this is going. Does that answer your question, Michael, or was that like completely off topic? And actually, yeah, I think looking at rereading your question, you're also asking the transition phase, right? Like, how do we transition with those multiple query languages? And yeah, that's where profiles will definitely probably be helpful.
All right.
I'll take next one, Oliver. Yeah.
What is the next one? Is there a pattern for a native iOS or Android app to request data from my wallet via OpenID4VP? Or is it web only at this point? You want to speak to that, Kristina, too?
Prepare for native iOS. Yeah, right now it's verifier website, JavaScript running in the browser, hitting a browser API, talking to a native app, which is mainly what it's being designed for. Yeah. I think what has been requested by some is not to exclude browser wallets. The verifier JavaScript running in the browser, talking to the browser API, and the browser API potentially helping mitigate request response with the browser wallet. So that one I think is, yeah, I'm not sure how that's going to be designed. App to app through the mobile operating system is, yeah, it's not on the table right now, unfortunately. I know it's probably blocked on iOS.
It's actually already supported, so I think
But isn't it supported only for Apple Wallet on iOS? Oops, it's recorded.
on Android. I think we misunderstood the question. I think I think for browser API, yes, yeah, I think he was just referring to OpenID4VP in general. So I think not with the browser API enabled features. With browser API, it's also supported at the moment on Android. I think the latest APIs that they provided allows a third-party developer, a line-party developer, to create a native app that talks to a mobile wallet directly. Now that I'm saying that, I'm not 100% sure. But basically, so if you have so in the normal OpenID4VP flow, I guess nobody prevents you from using.
Yes, Oliver's right. There's normal OpenID4VP flow. You can do app to app, just like browser to browser or browser to native app.
Yeah, the next question on why is there no NFC? At the moment, it's a little bit challenging to get full NFC support on iOS devices, but I think the answer is probably because nobody has defined it yet. But I agree actually that in order to be more inclusive, BLE probably makes more sense at the moment. But yeah, nobody really has defined an NFC profile yet. There are like different opinions on how to best support something like NFC. So technically, it might be possible to use the ISO specification to do NFC first, and then have a secure handover to some other protocol that has a little bit has more bandwidth. So that might be an option too. So potentially it could also already be possible through ISO, but you know, that's a discussion point.
Yeah, I don't think we've had an opportunity to clarify this publicly before, but yeah, the motivation behind OpenID4VP over Bluetooth is actually having an option to send credentials over Bluetooth in a credential format agnostic protocol, because 18.13-5, which is, there's very well tested, there's adoption. It only supports MDoc credential format right now. But from some of the implementer feedback, many usually start with online use case, and then when people realize that they might need to have a use case where they want to send credential over proximity protocol, they're like, oh, do we have to reissue in a new credential format because 1813-5 only supports MDoc credential format? So the challenge was, just like OpenID4VP itself is credential format agnostic, can we define a protocol over Bluetooth that is credential format agnostic? So you can just digit VC over Bluetooth, Anomcrats, PBS Plus, whatnot, right? So yeah, I think we have few implementations. I think Mosip has one, Deutsche Telekom has one, I think someone else recently built another, but that's a place where, yeah, like if you're interested, we do have input, because I think we didn't have as much traction as we were hoping to. So looking at some ISO members on the call, maybe the extension point is, can we extend 1813-5, which has some libraries and some implementations? Can we extend 1813-5 to support other credential formats? Like I do have a draft that would allow do other credential formats over -5, but we need implementation experience. We need a bit more discussion around it. So if that's your topic of interest, please reach out.
Yeah. Just to I want to avoid what's your favorite credential format discussion on Discord. So it's possible to use MDocs with ISO via NFC and Bluetooth Low Energy. And what Kristina was saying is it might be possible to do other credential formats via the same secure channel defined by ISO. Is there any other questions in the chat?
Is there any more questions? If not, we can close the call, or we can if there are any. So we've been putting a bunch of issues in the chat, but if you want anything to be explained verbally now, like query language proposal, transaction data proposal, feel free to raise your hand or put in the chat. Otherwise, I think we'll probably close the call.
Let's give people 1 more minute or two.
Yeah, this has been a great session. If you do have a question for Kristina or Oliver, please place it in chat. And if you don't, I'll talk while y'all are thinking about. Oh wait, Dan has posted a question. What terms should I search for to find docs in the app-to-app pattern?
Ooh, I'm gonna ask Joseph to unmute. Can you speak, Joseph?
Hey, yeah. If you search to app, it should actually come up with a blog post that I did on the OpenID website. But let me just find the link to it.
I can find it. You can keep explaining. I have that on bookmarked somewhere. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that was the extent of the question. So.
Great. So we can post the link when Kristina has it ready. And while other folks are thinking of other questions, we are doing a part 2 of this session, OpenID for VCI on Wednesday. That is going to be at the same time. It's going to be in Ask Me Anything format again. And we're going to have these awesome presenters, Kristina and Oliver, once again, joining us to share their knowledge. I am going to send out tonight. I will be posting the video to the OpenWallet Foundation YouTube for this session. I'll do the same thing on Wednesday, along with any links, and I'll send out some thank you notes probably Wednesday afternoon. Does anyone else have a question for this great team?
Yeah, super quickly. Again, thanks a lot, everyone, for coming with questions. Really appreciate it. I do expect a bit more questions from VCI, but just saying that we're not scary. We have our emails on the specs. If you have, even a slight question or don't feel comfortable opening an issue in a public GitHub repository, which I totally understand, honestly, feel free to shoot us an email. Like if you CC, all of us, one of us will make sure to answer. If you CC one of us, we'll get it to you at some point. But yeah, just saying that please don't hesitate to reach out. We really welcome all your insights and implementation feedback, and yeah. And yeah, sorry, just to wrap up, once we nail transaction data, query language, including the transition phase, how the transition looks like, and the browser API. The browser API, we have a PR open. We kind of just need to merge it. Once those big topics are in, we do plan to do a third implementers draft for OpenID4VP. So hopefully, fingers crossed, before the end of the year, we'll have a third implementers draft, which will get us close to final, hopefully. Okay, Sean, now I'm done.
now you're done, Kristina. No, thank you so much, Kristina and Oliver, and everyone else who helped out, both in the chat as well as Joseph. Good to see you again. And Tim, thank you for pitching in there. Really appreciate everybody joining us today. We are going to do this again, same time this Wednesday. This session has been recorded. It will be posted to YouTube. I'll be putting the links on the YouTube page for this video, as well as the OpenID blog. I'm sorry, the Open Wallet Foundation blog. And I cannot thank our presenters enough, and thank all of you for joining us. Again, this Ask Me Anything format is fantastic, and both Kristina and Oliver did just a fantastic job. And thank you, everyone. With that, I'm going to end this Zoom Ask Me Anything with Kristina and Oliver talking about OIDC4VP. And thank you all for joining us. And thank you, Kristina. Thank you, Oliver.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Office hours is a great idea. I guess Kristina, you and I will talk about that, and I can incorporate it into the notes if we want to talk about office hours. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are.
Thank you. Bye.